I have spent 25 years listening to concrete with my hands, the way a mechanic listens to an engine by laying a palm on the valve cover. And on Thursday at 3:17 p.m., inside a service tunnel 30 feet below River Mile 46, the sound I felt through my gloves wasn't a sound at all but a warning turned physical. A tightening groan that traveled the rebar like a tuning fork, and then the lining spat dust in a gray cough and the world tried to come down on my head with the patient indifference of gravity collecting a debt it never forgets. Men shouted in the way men do when they don't want to sound afraid. Lights swung on their tethers like hoisted anchors in a storm, and I was already counting spans and calculating load paths because the only way to keep fear from taking your throat is to give your brain something harder to chew. So I moved toward column C12, ordered the cutting of the airline to reduce vibration, pointed 2 laborers to the safe zone chalked on yesterday's inspection, and watched a curtain of fractured slurry hit the deck astride behind me while the deck plates rattled like loose teeth in a jar. No heroics, no speeches, just work. We stabilized the segment with cribbing and hydraulic jacks. We backed bodies out one by one, and when the dust settled enough to show the chalk lines again, I realized I had gray powder in my eyebrows and blood under my thumbnail where a bar kissed me, and I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because the sound in my chest needed to change shape before it cracked something important. Above ground, the river cut the afternoon in half like a steel rule pressed into a blueprint, and the late sun made everything look cleaner than it deserved, which is the same lie daylight always tells. I signed the incident report, told the city liaison we'd get a revised shoring plan by morning, and when the last siren faded, my hands were still shaking the way an idling engine shakes after you've shut it off but the flywheel hasn't surrendered its momentum yet. Driving home, I thought about the stupid trip we never took to Costa Rica, the old fantasy Lauren and I floated for 20 years like a leaf on top of a lake we never swam in, and the math felt simple in the cab of my truck with the smell of concrete dust burned into my shirt. Because when the day reminds you that ceilings can fall even when you did everything right, you stop pretending there will always be more days to waste. Lauren was at the stove when I came in, hair pinned with the little copper clip I bought in Charleston on a job where the hotel carpet smelled like lemons and cigarettes, and the kitchen looked like our kitchen always looks at 6:30. Soundtrack of a local news anchor nobody listens to, the good cast iron pan working a steak that should have been thicker, a glass of red wine she held by the bowl because she likes it warm, and the way she turned her head to look at me felt like the end of a sentence I hadn't heard the beginning of. "You're filthy," she said, and the words landed flat, not mean, not tender, just an observation someone might offer to a traveling salesman who lost his way and stepped into the wrong house, and I washed my hands at the sink longer than clean required, because hot water is a kind of therapy men accept without calling it therapy. "I had a scare," I said, keeping my tone even so it wouldn't spook the room, and I told her about the groan and the dust and the weight, the hydraulic hiss and the math you do when you don't want to die, and she made the face she makes when she's being polite for somebody's mother, and I realized I was reporting a near miss to a committee that had already adjourned. "We should finally take that trip," I said, not as a plea, not as a bargain, but as a man calling his own bluff after 2 decades of waiting for perfect weather. And the silence that followed didn't feel like thinking or surprise. It felt like the quiet you get when a compressor kicks off and you notice the headache that's been there all day. "That's a lot right now," she said, and she sipped the warm wine and told me about staffing and coverage and the girl on nights who keeps missing doses. And I nodded because these are real problems, adult problems, but under her words I heard the part she didn't speak. The distance like a hairline fracture you only see when the angle is right and the light is unforgiving. At dinner she asked about insurance forms and the girls' schedules and whether my mother's car still needed brakes. Competent questions from a competent woman who knows how to keep a household running. And I answered the way I always do, calm and specific, because competence is a language of love if you let it be. Yet every sentence felt like measuring tape that came up a half-inch short. After dishes, I stood in the doorway to the living room and watched Lauren scroll her phone with her thumb. That lazy, practiced half-attention that says the person in the room has already been weighed and filed. And I told myself I was tired, that the day had stained everything with fear, that tomorrow the world would click back into its track and the noise would sound like music again. But when the house settled and the HVAC tripped and the dog sighed the old dog sigh that means everything is ordinary, I lay in the dark and felt the tunnel again, felt the weight overhead and the math under my tongue, and understood with the kind of calm you only earn the hard way that there are failures you can shore and there are failures you can only expose, and I did not know yet which kind this was, only that something had shifted, and the part of me that survives by measuring load began to listen for the next groan. The house made its nighttime sounds. Ice maker thumping a hollow cube into the tray, ductwork ticking like cooling exhaust, our aging lab mix snoring with his paws twitching. And I lay there, eyes open, counting quiets between noises the way I count seconds between cracks and the first trickle of water. Lauren's breathing had the practiced evenness of someone who wants to be mistaken for asleep. I waited anyway. Men learn patience where their living depends on it. At 12:11 a.m., a mosquito hum of vibration came from her side of the bed. Not her main phone. I recognized that tone the way you recognize the pitch of your own truck. This was thinner, cheaper, the stealth note of a burner. My eyes adjusted to the hallway blue leaking under the door, and the glow bled out from her nightstand drawer like a secret not interested in staying secret. I slid my legs over the edge of the mattress and felt grit under my heel from work I hadn't fully washed off. A reminder of the cave-in that made me think of plane tickets and redemption. The nightstand drawer stuck, then gave, and there it was, a small, unloved phone with a cheap rubber case. The kind you buy with cash at a store where the clerk doesn't ask your name. It had no lock. People who are sure you're not looking don't bother with locks. A message pulsed on the screen. Can't wait for tomorrow. Marriott, room 508. A second line, use the side entrance. Same as last time. I felt my pulse jump at my throat and then drop into my stomach. That elevator lurch when the cables pay out too fast. 20 years of routine. 20 years of the shared calendar and the Thanksgiving logistics and the mortgage payments and late-night Tylenol runs. And here in my hand was a simple sentence as clean as a sod board. Tomorrow, room 508. Betrayal doesn't need poetry. Prefers receipts. My first instinct was the old stupid one. Wake her, confront her, demand an explanation that would be a lie with makeup on it. Instead, I did what has always kept me breathing. I started measuring. I took 3 quick photos of the lock screen message with my phone, careful to keep the timestamp visible. I scrolled. There was a thread of messages above it, nothing like teenage sexting, nothing loud, practical, sly. The voice of 2 people who have learned how not to get caught. Same spot as Tuesday. You were amazing today. He doesn't suspect a thing. Park on B2 near the elevator. There were emojis, but even those looked tired. I found a name at the top of the thread. Just an initial and a heart. Not a full name. Not yet. People who plan like engineers leave something loose for luck. People who cheat leave everything loose because luck is their religion. I opened her purse in the walk-in closet, moving slow to keep the leather from creaking. The smell of her perfume and some indefinable thing. Lipstick wax, pocket lint, something domesticated and small. Rose up like a warning. Inside the side pocket, under a folded grocery list, I found what I came for. Receipts. Not many. She's organized enough to hide a trail. But there's always one screw that doesn't seat all the way. A Marriott authorization slip with yesterday's date and no printed name. Just the last 4 of a card I didn't recognize. A restaurant receipt for 2 entrees and a bottle of wine at a place she would call nice, and I would call too loud. Another slip from a rideshare service with a pickup listed as the staff garage at her hospital and a drop-off at Marriott downtown. Times lined up with texts. Patterns make themselves known if you let them. Back in the dark, I stood at the bathroom sink with the door mostly closed, cold water running over my wrists because that's what you do when heat pools inside you and threatens to blow. In the mirror, I saw a man with concrete dust ground into the crease of his ear, a slice across the knuckle the color of rust, and an expression I recognized from job sites when a subcontractor cuts corners. Controlled, cold, the kind of anger you sharpen to a point because a blunt weapon bounces. I thought of saying her name, waking her, deciding that the house would be a battlefield tonight. I thought of our girls, their photos lined up on the hallway wall like mile markers on a road you took your time paving. The phone vibrated again, a softer buzz like a cat purring. You okay? The new message read. You went quiet. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, and returned. Tomorrow's a good one. New keycard. I took more photos. I scrolled through older messages and found a grainy picture of a room service tray and a corner of a man's shirt sleeve. Blue with a white pinstripe, the cuff rich and stiff. Not the Costco shirts I wear to bid meetings. Not a selfie, not a face, just enough for a memory to hook itself to later. I put the burner back exactly as it lay. Glass down, top edge lined with the drawer lip, charging cable looped twice and tucked. I closed the drawer gently, the way you lower a coffin lid. Beside me she turned over, stage asleep, a little sigh meant for the audience. The cheap phone went dead and dark. In the quiet, shame tried to sneak in, wearing the mask of failure. The lie that a man who didn't see this coming must be stupid, soft, a fool. I recognized that voice for what it was, useful only if it made me tougher, and I set it down like a tool I might need later but not now. I took my own phone into the hallway and made a new folder. I named it with a date and nothing else. I dropped every photo into it. I wrote the times into a note and the phrases that mattered: Marriott room 508. Side entrance. New keycard. Rideshare from hospital staff garage. I added the last 4 digits from the authorization slip. Clean lines on a page, lines you can build with. Then I opened the safe in my office, the gunmetal one under the false bottom drawer where I keep contracts and the backup drive. I pulled an old spiral notebook labeled scenes because Lauren once teased me for narrating job sites like movies to keep the sequence straight, and page 1 got a new header: failure analysis. Home. The first bullet was a question I wrote with a steady hand. What's the live load? The second was the answer any man who's ever had his heart broken finally learns to write. Enough to require shoring. At 12:40 a.m., I sat on the edge of the bed again and listened to my wife breathe. I did not touch her. I did not ask. I did not beg. I stared into the dark until the ceiling became a tunnel again and the tunnel became a ceiling, and somewhere between those two truths I decided that tomorrow, before dinner, I'd drive to Murphy's Bar on Halsted and find an old friend who knew how to turn evidence into truth without burning the whole structure down. I turned my face to the wall and slept 3 hours with my fists open. Murphy's Bar hadn't changed in 20 years, except for the television screens getting flatter and the stools leaning a little farther from upright. The same neon bud sign buzzed by the door, the same smoke-stained tin ceiling sagged with age, and the same smell of fried onions and spilled beer clung to the wood. For me, stepping inside was like dropping a plumb line into the past, straight, unforgiving, and familiar. Tommy O'Rourke was already there, hunched over a notebook the way he used to lean over lab notes in college. Back then, he was the guy who could hack into the dean's system for fun and leave no trace. Now he wore it all: gray stubble, a gut pressing against his leather jacket, and a detective squint that hadn't dulled since his years with the NYPD. If I'd expected sympathy, I wouldn't have come here. I came for clarity. "Andy," he said, standing half an inch taller than the stool allowed. We shook hands hard, the way men do when neither wants to admit they've aged. "Heard you crawled out of hell last week." "Hell had better lighting," I said, sliding onto the stool. "I need your eyes on something worse." He raised a brow. "Worse than rebar trying to scalp you?" I took out my phone and slid it across the bar. The folder of screenshots opened with the glow of sin, messages, receipts, timestamps. Murphy himself shuffled past to drop 2 bourbons, neat, onto the wood. He knew better than to ask questions. Tommy thumbed through the evidence slowly, making small grunts the way mechanics do when they see another man's mistake. Then he stopped at the rideshare receipt. Pickup, hospital staff garage. Drop off, Marriott downtown. He glanced up. "She's careful, but not careful enough. And you didn't confront her." I shook my head. "Not yet. You taught me that, remember? Never storm the room until you know where every exit is." That earned me the ghost of a grin. "So what's the plan? You want me to tail her, get the photos? Or you want to burn this guy down first?" I leaned back, bourbon hot in my throat. "I want to know who he is. Everything. If I'm tearing down a structure, I don't swing a hammer blind." I found the load-bearing wall first. Tommy closed the notebook with a slap. Name's Dr. Wesley Grant. Surgeon. Divorced last year. Reputation for 2 things: cutting too deep in the ore and too wide outside it. Hospitals had whispers of him double-billing insurance, playing fast and loose with patient funds. But he keeps skating. Money and charm go a long way in that world. My jaw set. So Lauren traded stability for fireworks. She traded up in her mind, Tommy corrected. Men like him sell the illusion of escape. Trouble is, the bill always comes due. He tapped the phone. "You've got enough here for suspicion, not proof. Courts don't care about suspicion. Then we get proof, I said steady. Tommy studied me for a moment. You've always been the quiet type, Andy. Measured. But I can see the fire under your collar right now. Don't let it blind you. You need to decide. Are you after payback or protection? I didn't hesitate. Both. She doesn't get to walk away with half of what I built while calling me boring. And he doesn't get to keep strutting like a clean man. Tommy's grin widened. All teeth. That's the Andy I remember. All right, here's what we do. I'll put a tail on them discreetly. Cameras, timestamps, faces. We'll build a file tight enough to choke a judge. You keep playing dumb. That's your job now. I took a long sip, the bourbon burning cleaner than anything I'd felt in weeks. She thinks I'm blind. Let her keep thinking that. Every lie she tells me is another brick in her own wall. Tommy tapped his glass to mine. To walls collapsing at the right time. The clink sounded like steel striking steel. For the next hour, we mapped it out on napkins and in his worn leather notebook. Patterns of movement, bank accounts to check. Which of his contacts could pull hospital access logs without raising alarms. The language was technical, cold, efficient, the way men talk when emotion has already been decided but the execution still needs math. Walking back to my truck under the yellow glow of the streetlights, I realized something. The tunnel collapse shook me, but Lauren's betrayal had focused me. The dust had cleared. Now it was about building, not breaking. She thought she'd married a man too predictable to notice. What she never learned was that predictability is just another word for patience. By the time I turned the key in the ignition, my course was set. Tomorrow, she'd smile at me over breakfast like nothing was wrong. I'd smile back, patient as a jack under concrete, waiting for the crack to spread. The bedroom clock glowed 2:07 a.m. in that sharp red light that always made the room feel colder. Lauren's shoulder rose and fell in its practiced rhythm. Her back turned to me. She thought I was asleep. That assumption was the only gift she'd given me lately. The burner phone was back in her nightstand. She hadn't bothered to move it. I didn't reach for it this time. I waited. Sure enough, the buzz came. A polite little hum, like a fly testing a window screen. She shifted, lifted the drawer, and angled her body toward the edge of the bed, the phone screen lighting her face. I rolled slightly, enough to see the reflection in the vanity mirror. She wasn't just reading. She was grinning. That grin hit harder than the collapse, harder than the dust choking my lungs a week ago. You survive concrete by respecting it. Betrayal? You survive that by never forgetting the expression someone wears while they dismantle your life. I timed her thumb movements, memorized the cadence. Then, when her breath settled back into the false pattern of sleep, I slipped into the bathroom and opened my own phone. The monitoring app Tommy had loaded onto her burner through a clone SIM card was already feeding me copies of every message. Technology may not stop a bullet, but it exposes liars. The words scrolled across my screen like acid. He's too boring to notice. You deserve excitement, not a man who only thinks about concrete and insurance forms. He'd crumble if he knew. Don't worry, he never will. My thumb tightened on the phone until the screen squeaked. 20 years together, and I was reduced to a punchline in someone else's dirty comedy routine. Then came the part that burned worse than the insults. He's got money tucked away. Joint accounts, retirement. I can move things without him even asking. We'll be fine. Don't worry about the bills, Wes. I've got access. Wes. Dr. Wesley Grant. The surgeon who cut flesh in daylight and cut lives in the dark. I stared at those words until my vision doubled. This wasn't just betrayal of the bed. It was a betrayal of the foundation. The accounts, the future, the roof over our girls' heads. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was predatory. I looked in the bathroom mirror. My face was lined with dust that had never fully washed away from the collapse. My eyes looked older, colder. And I whispered to my reflection, steady and low, she has no idea what's coming. Not rage, not a scream. Promise. I killed the light, slid back into bed, and let her warmth creep near me as if nothing had changed. She was dreaming of another man while plotting to rob me blind. I lay still, cataloging every word, every insult, every plan. And beneath all of it, one truth hardened inside me like cured concrete. She thought I was weak because I built my life on stability. What she didn't know was that stability is the most dangerous weapon a man can wield. Because when it cracks, it doesn't just fall, it collapses with purpose. The morning crowd at Lou's diner clattered silverware against plates, the air thick with the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee. It was the kind of place where deals happened without fanfare. Truckers swapping routes, salesmen scribbling orders, union guys complaining about foremen. Tommy chose it because nobody paid attention, and paying attention was the last thing I needed anyone doing. He was already in a booth by the window, shoulders hunched over a manila folder thick enough to warp its brass fastener. He looked up as I slid in across from him, his expression caught somewhere between pride and pity. "You asked for proof," he said, tapping the folder. "Well, you got it." I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the weight of it on the table, how something so small could feel like a wrecking ball. Tommy finally flipped it open for me. First page. A photo of Lauren and Wesley Grant stepping out of the Marriott side entrance, her hand brushing his arm like they were fresh out of high school. Not a surgeon and a nurse old enough to know better. The timestamp ran along the bottom, 9:42 p.m., 2 nights ago. "Got a whole roll of these," Tommy said, sliding the stack forward. "Different nights, different outfits. Always the same hotel. Always in the same room." My throat tightened, but I kept my hands steady as I flipped through them. One showed them at a restaurant, wine glasses raised. Another caught them in the parking garage, her leaning against his BMW while he unlocked the door. The camera didn't lie. It didn't soften. Then came the receipts, hotel charges linked to her hospital ID badge, which she'd used for access discounts. Tommy laid them out like evidence in a courtroom. "She's been signing him into staff-only areas," he said. "Security logs match her code with his visits. That's fraud, Andy. Not just adultery. She's bending hospital systems for him. That puts her in federal territory." I sat back, the diner noise fading under a pulse in my ears. Betrayal was one thing. Criminality was another. She wasn't just tearing down our marriage. She was dragging my name, my career, and my daughters into a pit that could swallow everything. "Tell me it gets worse," I said flatly, because somehow I knew it would. Tommy nodded, flipping to the last section. "Bank activity. Transfers from our joint account to a shell business listed as Wellstar Consulting. Owner, Wesley Grant. Amounts weren't huge yet, just under the radar, 500 here, 1,000 there. But the pattern was unmistakable. She's feeding him money," Tommy said. "Might be to keep his head above water, might be part of something bigger. Either way, you've got her dead to rights." I closed the folder and pressed my palm against it, feeling the edges dig into my skin. It wasn't just paper. It was the architecture of her betrayal, drawn in blueprints I could finally read. "What do you want to do?" Tommy asked, his voice quieter now. I thought of the collapse in that tunnel, the weight pressing down, the math that had kept me alive. I thought of Lauren's smile over dinner, pretending everything was fine while she texted her surgeon lover under the table. And I thought of my daughters, their trust in a mother who was selling it off by the hour. "I want more than revenge," I said finally. "I want justice. I want her lies exposed in daylight so bright she can't crawl back into shadow. And I want him standing next to her when it happens." Tommy studied me, then gave a slow nod. "Then we build the case airtight. No yelling, no theatrics. Just facts that'll bury them deeper than concrete." The waitress came by with a refill. I let her pour, nodded thanks, and never once took my hand off the folder. Evidence weighs more than words. And in that diner, over burnt coffee and cheap plates, I knew exactly how much it weighed. Enough to crush the last illusions of the woman I thought I married. The house smelled like garlic bread and marinara that night, the kind of dinner Lauren always threw together when she wanted to play it normal. She was at the stove, humming a tune she didn't realize she'd already hummed out of key 3 times. When she turned, the apron tied neat around her waist, she looked like the same woman I'd shared 2 decades with. But I'd seen the folder. Once you've read the blueprints of a collapse, you can't pretend the cracks aren't there. "Long day?" she asked, brushing a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Productive," I said, sliding into my chair. "No more, no less." Dinner hit the table and she launched into talk about hospital politics. The new intern who couldn't tell Celine from lidocaine, the endless budget meetings. Usually I'd listen, ask a few questions, and keep the rhythm going. But not tonight. I let her words hang in the air like drywall dust, settling slow and suffocating. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She flicked her eyes toward it, then back at me, trying to mask the tell. She laughed mid-story, a half-second late. That laugh used to be real. Now it was a stall tactic. "You're quiet tonight," she finally said. I met her gaze steady. "Just thinking." "About what?" "Load distribution," I said, reaching for the bread. She smirked, probably thinking I was lost in work again. Let her. The truth was sharper. I was measuring how much weight her lies could carry before the whole structure came down. Her fork clinked against the plate too loud. She filled the silence with chatter, but her eyes darted to the counter every time that phone lit up. I chewed slowly, offered no rescue, gave her nothing to work with. Silence became my hammer, every bite driving the nail deeper. When she excused herself to the bathroom, the phone buzzed again. I stood, walked over, and in one motion screenshotted the messages. "Can't wait for later. 5:08 is ready." Another line, "Bring the new card. We'll celebrate right now." I sent the screenshot to the folder Tommy and I had built, then set the phone back down, screen dark. By the time she returned, I was stacking plates, calm as ever. She smiled, too wide, pretending dinner had been just another Tuesday. Later, in bed, she leaned over to kiss me goodnight. I turned just enough that her lips met my cheek. She hesitated, then settled into her pillow, clutching her secret world against her chest like it was treasure. I lay still, staring at the ceiling fan turning lazy circles, and thought about how men like me win. Not with shouts, not with fists, with silence, with patience, with a plan that tightens one brick at a time until there's no space left for escape. James Whitmore's office smelled like old leather and ink, the kind of place where the walls had heard every confession a man didn't want to make at home. We'd worked together for years, contracts, zoning disputes, the occasional tax snarl. I trusted him because he didn't waste words. He looked up from the folder I laid on his desk, the same one Tommy had stuffed with photos, receipts, and logs. His glasses slid down his nose as he flipped through each page, slow and deliberate, like a judge weighing testimony. When he finally closed it, he leaned back, fingers steepled. "Well, Andrew," he said, "she's handed you the rope. Question is, do you want to hang her with it, or just cut yourself free?" "Both," I answered without hesitation. My voice was steady, low. "I'm not begging her to stop. I'm not fighting for scraps. I want protection. For me, for my daughters. And I want her held accountable." Whitmore nodded. "Then we move now. No warning, no open doors. We'll file for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial misconduct. With this evidence, a judge will freeze the joint accounts immediately. She won't be able to siphon another cent." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain, but relief, the way a steel cable feels when it locks into its anchor. "And the house. You keep it. Equity, custody, leverage, plus your clean record. She's compromised. Andrew. The court won't give her much ground to stand on." I thought of Lauren's laughter, the way she leaned over that phone, calling me boring while planning her future with another man. Good. She's going to learn boring building foundations. Excitement collapses. Whitmore's mouth twitched in something close to approval. "I'll draft the petitions today. Once it's filed, there's no turning back. Are you ready for that?" I met his eyes and didn't blink. I was ready the second she handed him my money. The printer in the corner spat out the first of the documents, the paper warm when I signed it. I didn't feel sadness or fear, just resolve. Men who design bridges don't weep when the old beams are torn out. They reinforce, they rebuild, they make sure nothing falls again. When I walked out of Whitmore's office, the sun was glaring off the courthouse steps across the street. For the first time since that tunnel tried to bury me, I felt like I was breathing fresh air. Lauren thought she was playing with secrets. What she didn't know was that I'd just put her name on official paper that would follow her farther than any hotel room number. The Marriott lobby was all glass and chrome, polished to the point of arrogance. I sat in my truck across the street, engine off, lights dead, watching couples slip through the revolving doors like actors heading for their cues. Inside, the elevators would hum, the ice machines would spit, and on the 5th floor, room 508 waited like a snare. Tommy was 2 blocks away in a borrowed sedan, camera bag at his side. The FBI team had parked in the shadows, plain suits with the look of men who only smile after paperwork is finished. Hospital security was looped in too. Grant's fingerprints were all over fraudulent access logs, and Lauren had stamped them with her badge like a signature. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a conspiracy. At 7:46, the front door of my house opened. I knew because Tommy was patched into the little camera I'd hidden in the foyer. Lauren stepped out in heels too tall for a casual night shift, coat swinging open just enough to flash the red dress she hadn't worn for me in 5 years. She kissed the dog on the nose like she was leaving for groceries, then locked the door behind her. The lie was complete, at least in her mind. "On the move," Tommy's voice crackled through my earpiece. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I'd already walked the path she thought was secret. Rideshare from the corner near the hospital. Side entrance at the Marriott. Keycard left for her at the desk under his name. Every move had been logged, photographed, backed up 3 times. All that was left was the drop. At 8:19, her silhouette appeared across the street. She glanced left, right, clutching her purse like it carried salvation. Then she slipped inside, vanishing into glass and chrome. I pictured her heartbeat quickening in the elevator, the little smile tugging at her lips as she rehearsed whatever lie she'd feed me tomorrow. Only this time I wasn't in the dark. The FBI moved quiet. 2 agents drifted from the lobby chairs, another from behind a magazine stand. Tommy muttered updates in my ear. Elevator stopping at 5. She's out, headed left. Room 508. I closed my eyes and counted. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then the agents moved. The hallway camera caught it. For suits closing in, one knocking. The door opening to reveal Wesley Grant in a hotel robe, champagne sweating on the nightstand behind him. Lauren's laugh cut off halfway as the badges flashed. Tommy whispered, "They're in. Both in custody. No struggle. Rooms being searched." I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just breathed out, slow and controlled, like a man stepping out of a collapsing tunnel into daylight. Half an hour later, Tommy slid into my truck, tossing the camera bag in the back. "It's done. They've got enough to bury him in audits, and her right along with him. Mail fraud, healthcare fraud, adultery. Hell, they'll probably tack on jaywalking if it sticks." I kept my eyes on the hotel doors, where 2 agents escorted Lauren out in cuffs. Her hair was perfect, her lipstick unbroken, but her face carried something I'd never seen before. The look of a woman who finally realized the ground wasn't solid under her feet. "She saw you?" Tommy asked. "No," I said. "Doesn't matter if she did, because this wasn't about spectacle. This wasn't about her knowing I'd orchestrated every nail in her coffin. It was about control, taking it back, piece by piece, until nothing she touched could touch me again." As the agents loaded her into the back of the black SUV, I turned the key in my ignition. The truck rumbled awake, steady as ever. Tommy looked at me, waiting for something. Anger, relief, maybe even grief. All I said was, "Let's go." The hotel shrank in the rearview mirror. For the first time in months, the road ahead didn't look like a burden. It looked like freedom. The courthouse conference room was painted in the same bland beige that tries to make everyone feel calm. But I didn't need calming. The divorce papers sat in front of me, the ink already dry. Across the hall, Lauren's attorney shuffled and stalled. But the outcome was carved in stone the second the folder hit Whitmore's desk weeks ago. Adultery, financial misconduct, conspiracy. Every line of evidence stacked against her until she had nothing left to bargain with. The judge signed off in under 10 minutes. 20 years ended with the stroke of a pen, but I didn't feel broken. I felt free. That night, I sat my daughters down at the kitchen table. They were old enough to understand lies when shown the truth. I slid the folder across the table, careful to cover the ugliest photos but leaving the timestamps, the receipts, the messages. Their faces shifted from confusion to hurt, then to something harder. Your mother made choices, I told them, steady as poured concrete. She chose lies, she chose crime, and she chose another man. I didn't choose this, but I chose not to let it bury us. We moved forward. Together. There were tears, yes. Questions, too. But there was no screaming, no begging me to fix what couldn't be fixed. They saw the facts, and they saw me. Calm, unshaken, still standing. That mattered more than any speech. A week later, the headlines hit. Prominent surgeon and nurse sentenced in healthcare fraud scandal. Their mugshots ran side by side. Two people who once thought they were untouchable now reduced to cautionary tales. Colleagues whispered. Neighbors stared. And the same community that once admired Lauren now crossed the street to avoid her name. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Watching the structure collapse exactly as I calculated was enough. On a Saturday morning, I took the old lab mix for a walk down by the river. The tunnel job had resumed, new beams in place, men working without fear. I stood on the bank, breathing in air that smelled of mud and steel, and realized the collapse hadn't just shaken concrete. It had shaken me awake. Lauren was gone. Grant was gone. The marriage was ashes. But I was still here, solid. I wasn't a man ruined by betrayal. I was the man who dismantled it, brick by brick, until nothing of it remained. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt light. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just free.
Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale. Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.